numbers.
Oh,
How much percent of which, a percent of which, percentage of which, and I'm like, I just need to write everything down.
so why don't you just put on your
Because I
side?
forgot. Because I forgot. I assume that I'll remember them by then, but no.
I'm not good at numbers too.
That's why I'm doing social science.
Okay, now we keep silence. Start for 10 seconds.
Hi everyone, I'm going to officially start this session now. First of all, I'm very delighted for all for you to be here today. My name is Yujong Kwon and I'm from the Green Environment Youth Korea, GEYK, which is located in South Korea. And so many of you might have come here expecting what is relevant to this with Squid Game. And Squid Game is a really mainstreaming Netflix South Korean drama you guys many have heard of. But so basically the story is about Squid Game is about fighting for their life, and for the one person remaining, the person receives a lot of prize money. And coming to COP26, you may have had some relevant impression, as I did, that today we're here fighting, negotiating, demanding for our life, survival, and our future. However, unfortunately, when one person is left standing, we can't achieve the goals that are set in COP26, securing 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so I invited all our speakers here from the Asia region just to share their own perspective, their background and knowledge, and how they're responding to carbon neutrality back at home. And so I hope that we can kind of synergize what we have learned today and kind of drive on the momentum to drive words into action. So I welcome you all here today and thank you so much for coming. So today the main concept, although the key concept today is carbon neutrality. And this is a concept you would have heard as much as 1.5 degrees Celsius. The term is simple, simply offsetting the amount of carbon we emit into the air, making it into zero. However, we have a timeline set, according to IPCC, that we need to ensure that the carbon neutrality is met by 2050. Last year, worldwide, our national governments had reflected this into their policies, and they have begun to drive on the momentum. However, the ambition is there, yet it is our responsibility to ensure that we have the action to ensure it's not just about the talk, it's about action. So wonderful panels we have today listening. We're going to be listening to the insight, perspective, sharing a more youth-inclusive approach on how our governments are responding to this and how we should ensure that they're going into the right direction. We have first Hyunyu Kim from GEYK Korea. We have Chen Changlong and we have Lin Chaoro from Taiwan Youth Climate Coalition, or known as TWYCC. We have Hermaya Chan from CarbonCare InnoLab, or CCIL. We have Koana Yanagisawa from Climate Youth Japan, CYJ. So before we dive into our main discussion, let me just share briefly who GEYK is, as we are the hosts of this event today. So we are a youth-oriented climate change organization back in South Korea. We focus to ensure that more Korean youth are advanced to the international stage, for them to take part in the environmental and climate change dialogue that is happening in the global setting. We are also focused to ensure our decision makers are taking practical actions with a more youth-inclusive approach at the forefront of the new climate regime. In GEYK, our value is global activity and networking. This is one of our main key values. So we work on capacity building to strengthen the network with other global youth organizations. And since climate change is a movement, is a transboundary issue, it's important to ensure that we take this action in a more international environment. So GEYK has been participating in COP since our organization back in 2014. And as we represent Korean youth, we're not only here to attend as observers, but we are here to coordinate side events as we are here today, talk to other delegates as well, and to ensure that the momentum is going on with action. And most importantly, we bring back home the ongoing dialogue so we can localize it and share it within our community and address that climate change related topics is being discussed in a more youth-oriented manner. We've also been annually participating in the Asia Climate Leadership Camp. This main focus is on divestment. And aiming to stigmatize fossil fuels, visiting each coal-fired power plants in the hosting country. So this is one of our GEYK's key values to ensure that we're going for clean and green energy. So when we're out in these international settings, it really sheds light on the actions our government lacks, and it's our job as youth to ensure that our government reflects the citizens' concerns outside of national borders. GEYK has annually been hosting Power Shift Korea, also known as PSK, and this event comes from the Global Power Shift organized by 350, a nonprofit organization in the US. We focus to build a global climate movement. And the name Power Shift has two meanings to it. So first, it's shifting our world decision-making people from the older generation to the younger and future generation. And second, it's about shifting our energy system to the renewable energy regime. From 2019, GEYK has been involved in the Youth Policy Network, and this is where we're able to propose policies regarding our climate environment division. So back in 2020, 44 policy proposals were initiated and 4 were enforced. And 25% of the total number of policies from the Youth Policy Network has been driven from the Climate Environment Division, which GEYK is associated with. And last but not least, GEYK networks with national and international youth organizations. We hosted our first ALCOY, which is also known as Local Conference of Youth, last year, to strengthen the support with other local youths. And also, we also hosted the Asia Climate Rally, and this was held with other Asian youth organizations on the very same day to show our support in the Asia region. We also took part in the first environmental forum for future generations, which was communicating our demands, what we want, and our voice to the Ministry of Environment. Great. So that's enough of me talking for now, and I want to now give the floor to our wonderful panelists that we have today. We want to share what's going to happen back at home, and we're also going to learn about how youth is responding to this. So starting with Sunyu Kim from GEYK, we will have the floor to him. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sunil Kim, the Green Environmentalist Korea, who will be in charge of the first presentation. Nice to meet you. I'm very nervous to be in charge of the first presentation here, but on the other hand, it's such an honor. Prior to talking about the Korea's effort related to the carbon neutrality, there are two question marks that will be addressed first. It is what and why. When we talk about the carbon neutrality, we sometimes use the basis of the word without understanding it exactly. Why carbon neutrality should be done, and how it should be done, and exactly what it means. So let's briefly talk about the two question marks. What is carbon neutrality? And actually, I think it's actually a very easy question for the discussion here. The state in which the total carbon dioxide proceeds and the carbon dioxide reduced or offset from net zero is called the carbon neutrality. So, why are we paying attention to the carbon neutrality? I will ask you a simple question. Can we completely zero carbon dioxide emissions? Yeah, that's right. Of course, it's impossible. Carbon dioxide will naturally be released in life activity of the ecosystem, and human activity will be the same. The preceding circular graph shows the proportion of carbon dioxide emitted worldwide last year. Looking at the table, the 33% of the total electricity and transport and industry account for the 18% each. The main commonality of the all three items is that they are closely related to energy, especially thermal power energy. Humans have always needed a lot of energy. Historical fact and the old development next to us now tell that. Therefore, managing the energy need is bound to be most effective for the carbon neutrality, including a new and renewable energy and conversion of the existing energy and the management of the thermal power generation. There is another reason why we should pay attention to the carbon neutrality. It is the IPCC's 1.5-degree report. For a long time, IPCC has been worried and concerned after the global average temperature rise of the 1.5 degrees. Don't we already know what happens after 1.5 degree rise? In August this year, the IPCC further specified the shared socioeconomic pathway, they call it SSP, that exists in the comprehensive from although AR6 climate change report. With the reduction of the carbon emission and the fossil fuel management, the 5 scenario has been the form that mankind can reach, and detailed the prospect for each scenario have been newly announced. Although we cannot talk about the prospect mentioned in the report due to time constraint, we need to reach at least the SSP 1 by 2.6 to maintain our existing lifestyle, and the carbon neutrality must be realized first to achieve this. Okay. Of course, the many countries already implement policy for the carbon neutrality. Korea is also making effort to meet the standards, such as the establishment of the 2015 Carbon Neutrality Committee. The committee was created in October last year, and the technical working team was created to build a carbon neutrality scenario during the first half of the year. And the draft carbon neutrality scenario was created around August. But although at the beginning of the announcement, there were many criticisms of the scenario, but by September, 94 civic group and the self-selected council accept the opinion, and the final scenario was finally released on the October 18. Korea's carbon neutrality scenario consists of the 2 options, the scenario A and B. Both scenarios assume a net zero statute, and they are set based on the IPCC 1.5 degree report criteria, excluding overseas reductions. In case of the scenario A, focus on the reduced emission as much as possible based on the complete interruption of thermal power generation. And in case of scenario B, it still has thermal power generation. However, inactively to utilize the remover technology such as the CCUS. The 2 scenarios is very similar, but at the same time, there are the deep difference. And there are various conflicting opinions depending on the difference. First of all, let's find out the difference through the scenarios overview. The table above is the view of the carbon neutrality scenario. In particular, the yellow part is the noteworthy, and especially in the conversion and the CCUS part. And it can be seen that there is a clear difference between the A and B. Korea's carbon neutral scenario is based on the NDC of the 2018, and considering that and the difference between the scenario, the setting of this scenario can be said to be a very radical reduction. The necessity of the carbon neutrality and the pressure on many national levels seems to have worked. Next, let's look at the issue surrounding the scenario. The first sector to deal with is the conversion. Earlier, we mentioned that in the case of conversion, the scenario A and B shows a clear difference in the reduction figure. The factor that makes the biggest difference is the presence of thermal power generation. Basically, the carbon neutrality scenario assumes the removal of the thermal power generation, but the LNG power generation still remain in the scenario B. In this part, there will be a difference in emission of the 200,000 tons in the conversion sector of the 2 scenarios. There is also the controversy over the carbon-free gas turbine. Scenario commonly discuss the transition through the carbon-free gas turbine, but this technology is still under development, which is the lack of the particularly. In addition, there is an opinion that there was a lack of the consideration for the energy security. It is because the existence of the Northeast Asian grid, which intend to build an energy grid by the connecting the national power grid in the Northern East Asia. But the prevailing opinion is that the possibility of the cooperation, the virtually low considering the UN sanction on the North Korea and Russia. However, compared to the next problem to be dealt with, the problem is conversion sector is really very small. The next sector we are going to deal with the industry. Since the first committee was formed, the industry has maintained a negative stance on the carbon neutrality. And the criticism has continued over the industry too low reduction since the final scenario came out. In particular, the biggest problem seems to be that it focused on the indirect measure, such as converting new raw material or introducing the cogeneration system without the full reduction. Another problem is that industry are hesitant to actively participate in the reduction on the pretext that it could put a burden of the economy. That attitude will expressed by industry opinion in the hydrogen and the CCUS sector. As carbon dioxide emissions are closely connected to the industrial sector, this lukewarm attitude the industry is expected to play a negative role in the implementation of the future scenarios. Through the scenario, Korea government expressed the intention to strength of supply based on water electrolysis hydrogen that called the green hydrogen. To foster in the export industry and use it as a clean energy source. This intention was implied to extend the supply of hydrogen car in connection with the transportation sector. There were a lot of opinion about this. It is sufficient to receive hydrogen from the petrochemical process, and it is too early to focus on green hydrogen only when the direction of the use is considered. And considering Korea's low renewable energy ratio among the OECD country, there were opinion on whether it was appreciated for Korea focus on green hydrogen. The last sector deal with is the CCUS. Concern about the carbon capture utilization and storage have existed continually even before the scenario. The most controversial point is that CCUS is not yet an available technology, and there are many disagreements of this part. Thus, in favor of widening of the reduction through the introduction of CCUS in the scenario says that the pace of technology development is different from before, and that is possible if the government invests in new technology and prepare infrastructure in earnest. On the contrary, those who are skeptical about the CCUS criticizing that even if the technology advanced are possible, the problem of preparing large-scale infrastructure has not been resolved, and the CCUS will be an excuse to hide fossil fuel use. In this scenario, CCUS amount for the 5,500,000 ton the proposal A and the 8,500,000 ton for proposal B. The highest among single reduction. This means that the introduction of technology is essential for the implementation of the scenario. Can CCUS be introduced after overcoming various problems? So far, we have looked at Korea's carbon neutrality scenario from four perspectives. Although there are many opinions that it was the best option to choose from the rapidly growing country. In other words, due to the nature of Korea, where chemical manufacturing accounts a large portion of the national industry, we have made great effort to calculate a maximum that can be reduced. And there is also evaluation the figure of better radical reduction compared to other developed countries. However, on the contrary, there are many opinions that there are clear limitation and problem. Technologies that did not reach the commercialization stage and the diplomatic issues that were not already often included in the reduction contents. And they said certainly no, but overseas reduction were still included. In addition, criticism that it was the scenario created without the discussing carbon budget was inevitable. Finally, the combination of expression, the total emission and net emission, made an error in the amount of the reduction. So, still various criticism is continued. However, after numerous twists and turns, the scenario eventually come into the world, and many youths began to find their own role and carry out various activities. So, what activities have Korean youth been doing for carbon neutrality and since this carbon neutrality scenario? Youth have expressed the skepticism about this since the first carbon neutrality scenario was released in August, we are shocked by the ambitious target setting, which is only the 35%, and we were also shocked by the detailed provision of this scenario. Therefore, the A-News organization in Korea, including GEYK, created 2014 climate and nature scenario and obtained the consent of the 43 citizen education and the legislative organization. And eventually, the scenario was submitted to the Carbon Neutrality Committee. As a result, it is included in the appendix of the carbon neutrality scenario as a suggestion arguing an active approach to setting top-down reduction method. The 2014 climate neutral scenario proposed by youth is based on the CAT's recommendation that developed countries should realize carbon neutrality by the 2014, and takes the top-down method as mentioned earlier. This is a scenario that can also meet the IPCC's recommendation criteria through the higher reduction in figure than not existing the 14% NDC. In addition to the policy direction of creating the summit scenario, many youths in Korea expressing the direct action with concern and the complaint about the carbon neutral scenario. During the scenario presentation conference on the October 18, the many youth people also staged the large-scale protest. However, looking back on the past, the launch of the carbon neutrality scenario is also clear progress. But we should never be suspected. As many critics probe, there are still more problems to be solved. Therefore, the government should be aware of the lack and development potential of the scenario and do its best to receive them in a clear way to reach net zero and carbon neutrality. Even at this moment, youth are constantly engaged in the activity for carbon neutrality, for climate action, and for what we believe is right. It is not just a story unique to Korea, but also a story that applies to all youth sitting here. We know that everyone here is passionate about carbon neutrality. I hope we will do our best for our goal, and I hope we imagine the tomorrows of Earth without compromising with anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangyu, for that wonderful speech, especially at the end of not compromising our future. That's especially something that we should all take into our heart as well. And now, following our next speaker, there are Cheng Long and Chao.
Yes.
Cheng Long, yeah, awesome. And they're from TWYCC. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chao Ling. You can call me just Chao as a way Italian to say goodbye. And on behalf of Taiwan Youth Climate Coalition, also shortened as TWYCC, I would like to share some our experience in relating to carbon neutrality. Yeah. So today's the content will divide it into 3 parts, and I will be the man to discussion for the first part. And in terms of the obstacle we confront and also how we do to reaching the 2050 net zero, Zhen Lang will share more story with you. So delving into legislation review, I must say taking the legal action is play a key role to carbon neutrality. And it is not a new thing. And all of us will already know that in a global scale, there are already 2 treaties and try to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. The first is Kyoto Protocol, and the other is Paris Agreement. So here I show some major milestone and a future timeline, and try to indicate the important thing about taking legal action. So you can see in 1997, it is the time the Kyoto Protocol is adoption, and in 2005, it is also the Kyoto Protocol entering the force. And there's also another 2 important timeline. It is 2015 and also this year. What I am trying to say, it is like Taiwan was actually one of the few places try to take the legal action to control the greenhouse gas emission. And you can see in around 2006, Taiwan has already a lot of meeting with stakeholders, and they try to discuss how to fighting the climate change. Yeah, as you mentioned here, and we already have the drafting and go through the negotiation in the same year. In 2015, it is also the year Paris Agreement came to the UNFCCC, and Taiwan has already tried to enter in the force of the act. So if we picturing our future, I point out two different and important timelines. It would be 2030 and 2050. So if we see the goal on a global scale as well, how we try to approve it. In terms of the 2030, you can see like Japan, the US, the EU, and also UK, they have a quite an ambitious goal, and they want to cut at least 43% of the emission. And in the 2050, they want to be carbon neutrality in a short term. And looking back in Taiwan, and our current target was not good enough, because in 2030, we only want to cut 20% of emission. And picturing the 2050, there is only a half of it. So it is not a capable goal try to reach carbon neutrality. And if we see more in detail, we see the roadmap how to achieve carbon neutrality, you will see it is not very clear. It seems like there is a large improvement to do for Taiwan. Unfortunately, we don't have a clear map for that. So besides that, we also have some difficulty we have confirmed. So I will invite Zhen Lang to share more with you.
So in the next session, I'm going to present some of the obstacles that we confront in Taiwan when we are achieving our net zero goal. Like the first of the obstacles that we confront is the method accountability. Like as Chao have mentioned, that we have already released the Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act in 2015, and the competent authority is the Environmental Protection Administration. And the act is followed by a sector-based management, which is, if I take the Ministry of Economic Affairs as an example, like the Ministry of Economic Affairs is responsible for the industry and energy sectors, which is comprise about 2/3 of our greenhouse gas, of the CO2 emission. But it is strange that the Environmental Protection Administration have little say and to change the decision of the Ministry of Economic Affairs. However, the Economic Affairs prioritize the economic development rather than to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So the second obstacle is that we are lacking the carbon pricing instruments that can capture the external cost of the greenhouse gas emissions and also stimulate the energy transition. So until now, 46 countries have already put some of the price on carbon, and the EU also adopt the CBAM, which is the Carbon Border Adjust Mechanism in this June. And so it will be detrimental to Taiwan competitiveness in the international low carbon trade market in the future. And also is the topic of this section, which is the net zero emission roadmap. And Taiwan haven't set out the net zero emission roadmap, and although we already set out the goal of net zero carbon emission by 2050 in the new release draft amendment law by the government. And so we must have to complete the roadmap quickly and also outline the strategy for the 3 decades to come. So we can take the IEA, the net zero roadmap for the electric industry as an example. So it suggests that in 2035 we should all over net zero emission electricity in the advanced countries, and also in the 2040 the net zero emission electricity should apply globally. And apart for the policies, the climate change issue is also people are also pay less attention to the climate change. So if we take a look at the middle coverage, most of them are related to COVID-19 vaccines, local politics, or some earthquakes happen in Taiwan. And also if we take a look at the legislative year, this is the agenda in October to this year, and most of them are related to COVID measures, but only one of them is related to climate change. And last but not least, the general public have little knowledge about the ad. Only 24% have heard of that ad, and only knowledgeable 4% have understand the ad. So it's very crucial for us to take action to enhance the ambition of our government, and also to enhance the awareness of the Taiwanese. So the first thing that we do is to take part in the law revision group. So TWYCC have cooperated with other NGOs and the legislators to propose an amendment act of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Management Act this year. And some of the highlights are we enhance our climate ambition goal to reach net zero in 2015, and we also impose carbon tax or carbon fee, and we also assign authority and responsibility clearly, and also ensure and strengthen capacity building, transparency, and public publication. And we also submit our advocacy to the presidential office just right before our climate strike. Because of the pandemic, we can't really go on the street and march on the street. We only stay in one location. So we have soapbox that allows people to share their views on climate change, and also how can the government how to do better. And also we have a small page which is related to the graduation ceremony for the high emission industry, which implies that the high emission industry should switch to a low emission industry, and to reduce their carbon emission. So at last, it's important to go beyond the echo chamber. So we gathered different stakeholders from Taiwan, from the non-environmental NGOs, the political figures, the climate experts, and the YouTubers to share their views on climate change, and also how can the government can do better. So to sum up, I'm very proud to announce that Taiwan have upgraded their law, which is the Taiwan's climate change response law recently, and it has setting a more ambitious goal, which is achieving net zero in 2015, and also it's going to impose the carbon price. So, but we have some warmth for improvements for the Taiwan government. So we will keep advocating for the net zero roadmap, and also the climate policy mainstreaming, and also raising awareness of climate issues. So that's the end. So feel free to contact us and to see our upgrades. And here's our Facebook, Instagram, and media.
Okay, you guys can have some time to put that QR code on your camera. I'll give you some time. Follow them on SNS. That was a really nice speech. Thank you once again for TWYCC for sharing the insights of Taiwan. And I think that the graduation ceremony for the High Emission Institute was very, very interesting. I think that's something that we can also adopt back in South Korea too. So thank you, that was very interesting. And once again, I think TWYCC has also highlighted that we need to raise public awareness for our public as well. And I think that is why our youth is here today, just to show some relevant activities, campaigns that we're doing advocating for carbon neutrality. So thank you once again. So our next speech is from Hermia Chan, and she is from CarbonCare InnoLab. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Hermia. So I'm not officially working for CarbonCare InnoLab, but we have a small delegation group this year thanks to CarbonCare InnoLab. They are potentially one of the only organizations that so generously share their badges with youth in Hong Kong. So a quick shout out to Tan Yao there. So the Hong Kong government announced that their long-term decarbonization plan just last month on October 8th. And they're going to strive for carbon neutral, they didn't mention net zero, before 2050. And I also have to mention before, because they kept emphasizing that they're doing better as they're pledging to do it before 2050. And they're going to allocate $240 billion to tackle or to finance measures for carbon mitigation and adaptation. Well, in terms of mitigation, there are 4 major decarbonization strategies. That is because so over 60% of emissions are from electricity generation in Hong Kong. And out of that, 90% of the electricity is actually used by buildings. So you can see from there, the top 2 are mainly targeting electricity generation and also energy saving in buildings. And next, slightly less than 20% of the emission is from transportation. So we're going to make transportation a little bit more green in the coming 30 years. And 7% of the emission is from waste. So we're going to limit the emission from waste by doing waste reduction and also waste to energy facilities. And other than that, there's also mention of adaptation and also governance. So first of all, they're going to establish a steering committee on climate change and carbon neutrality. So that committee will be overseeing and setting strategies for plans to carbon neutrality in Hong Kong, and that will be led by our Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, at least for a couple of years. And other than that, there will also be the Office of Carbon Change and Carbon Neutrality and Interdepartmental Carbon Neutrality Task Force. And there will also be a dedicated advisory committee that they said will be involving a lot more public and also youth. But just bear in mind that it's advisory, is not really on the table, negotiating with the legislators. And in terms of adaptation, they're emphasizing that there will be strengthening infrastructure to combat especially sea level rise, as Hong Kong is a coastal city, but also other extreme weather events such as tropical cyclones and also drought and extreme heats. Other than that, they're trying to improve cities' resilience by developing contingency plans for natural disaster, highlighting the transportation infrastructure and also how to warn public more efficiently. But are those plans enough? So on behalf of the delegation group, we don't think so. And this is why. In general, the decarbonization targets are not ambitious enough in our opinion. Hong Kong is quite a developed city. We can do a lot more and a lot faster. So we have pledged to fade out coal by 2050, according to our chief executive. But then if we look at this at the same time, by 2050, we're only increasing our renewable energy to 7.5 to 10%, which is totally not enough. But then right now it's actually only 0.2%. By 2050, the goal of the government is to increase wind power to about 4%, waste to energy to about 4%, and solar power to only 1 to 2%. However, according to a university research by the Polytechnic University a few years ago, if we utilize all the rooftop in Hong Kong, we can actually generate up to 10% from solar energy. So our government taking all these measures, all these opportunities, all these wasted areas into account when it comes to renewable energy? We don't think so. And apart from that, net zero is not exactly means carbon neutrality, so just pledging for carbon neutrality is not really enough. And lastly is the lack of scientific support. We have no idea how exactly the government is planning to achieve these plans. This is on the left, wait, yes, on the left you can see, it is Hong Kong's plan. You can probably see the dotted line going down. So by 2035, we will be reducing 50%, and by 2050, we will be achieving carbon neutrality. But how exactly are we going to do it? What are the mixed views? What are the measures that they're going to adopt? We have no idea, and we don't even know how to advocate because we have no idea what they're doing. And in terms of mitigation, so as mentioned earlier, there are a lot of potential of renewable energy in Hong Kong that are not explored. And there's also the reluctance to phase out natural gas and nuclear energy in the 60 cities fixed fuel mix. So especially with nuclear energy is pretty controversial, but then the government seems to be keeping nuclear energy for all the way till 2050. And where are the nuclear energy from? The energy is mainly imported from mainland China, the Greater Bay Area. We have a lot of nuclear plants kind of surrounded Hong Kong, and that raised a lot of concerns by Hong Kong citizens. Although the safety of nuclear energy is always a heated debate, but then we need to think about how can Hong Kong be a little bit more self-reliant when it comes to energy. Heavy reliance on energy importing from China. China is limiting the energy use earlier this year. So would they share the energy with us? Would they allow us to buy it? That will also be a concern. So in terms of adaptation, we're very, very worried that it only mentioned about the assessment and protective measure of government infrastructure, and they didn't mention anything about community resilience in climate change. And when it comes to heat wave, the government only mentioned about the reassess the government infrastructure and also common area, the open space for the citizens. But then, what are the health impacts of heat wave? Hong Kong hospitals, the medical sector is already pretty overloaded. How exactly are they going to adapt to a more warming weather? So we think that the action plan totally overlooked the climate change impact on Hong Kong citizens, especially when it comes to heat impact on the less privileged communities. And lastly, if you read the entire thing, you will see this phrase a lot. So plan to commence a strategic studies on something, including hydropower, including carbon pricing, and including a lot of other renewable energy. So they're always going to implement some sort of strategic studies, but when exactly are we going to implement all these changes? So after reading the plans, we'd like to share a little bit on Hong Kong youth action, but then before that we need to understand Hong Kong youth awareness on climate change. So, wait, oh no, this is the old, yes, it's okay, I can share it. Can I? So, I can share it a little bit if you can just listen to me. So Hong Kong, we do have climate, not really exactly climate education, but we do mention a little bit of climate change in our education system, especially in geography courses. We'll talk about the climate science behind. Originally, you will see that people in Hong Kong, according to the Save the Children studies, they care about climate change, but climate change is the lowest priority. When it compared to other such as disability, mental health, and more other issues. So I would say Hong Kong youth has the awareness on climate change, but they have no idea how to act on it. So here are some of the examples. So we do have Friday for Future strike back in 2018 to 2019. But then when it comes to recent years, all the political situation, strikes and protests become a little bit more sensitive, and they stop organizing all these strikes. But then, as I know, there are still youth who are doing strike on Friday as a sign to protest about climate change. And earlier well, last year we have the first local conference of youth in Hong Kong, raising Hong Kong youth awareness on that. And Hong Kong Climate Emergency Summit is organized by my organization. We're trying to also raise awareness, but also focusing on the interdisciplinary matters of climate change. We have sessions about climate and health, climate and finance, and climate change and ocean, trying to raise people awareness with all these different sectors. And we also try to make it a little bit more fun. So during the breaks, we rickroll our audience, playing different meme songs, and we also have like professors presenting with memes on it, trying to make it a little bit more fun for our youth audience. And our delegation group also written a youth statement on climate action, and we received over 500 signatures in just a little bit more than a month. But then I would say a lot of these youth activities, a lot of these youth organization, we focus too much on raising awareness. From combining my experience at COP, I think a lot of Hong Kong youth, we're aware what is going on. We're aware that the climate is warming, but we don't know what to do. With the broken trust between the government and Hong Kong youth, it's a lot more difficult for us to find channels to really voice out our opinions. And a lot of us don't know what to do apart from individual action, because individual action is all that taught kind of at school. So how to do more on like capacity building to understand these issues, and capacity building on how to act on these issues, how to encourage intergenerational or intersectoral dialogue. When we go back to Hong Kong, that will be quite a challenge, but that is something that we can do in the future. So in conclusion, we think that the Hong Kong government needs to accelerate and realize the climate change mitigation adaptation plans based on scientific-based targets, and in order to build a resilience of the local communities for extreme weather. Thank you.
Thank you, Hermia Chan, for the wonderful speech. And actually, in the last slide, I actually want to highlight that she mentioned that these mitigation and adaptation plans needs to be based on the scientific-based target, and that is also what we're advocating back in South Korea. I'm pretty sure that's what all the other youth organizations are also advocating well. So they have the ambition, but it's not really based on scientific-based approach. And thank you for actually highlighting that. That was really well done. And so our next speaker will be from Climate Youth Japan, CYJ, and her name is Koana, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us today. We are really privileged to join you as Asian youth here. I am Kohane Anagisawa from Climate Youth Japan, and today we are going to talk about carbon neutrality scenario and related activities, also Climate Youth Japan commitments. This is today's agenda, and before I begin, I assume the floor might get a bit full after all the great presentations, so let me ask you a short exercise. So my colleague will provide you the QR code from now on, so please scan the code and then tell your opinion towards the Japanese government. Any positive or negative or short or long comments are more than welcome. So please free to comment on here by the end of my presentation. Now let's begin with sharing the climate change policies of the Japanese government. This graph shows that change in recent years in the amount of greenhouse gases emitted by Japan in terms of CO2. Over 14,000 metric tons was remarked in 2013 and has continued to decrease ever since year then, with the total amount of emissions in fiscal year 2019 being minus 14% compared to fiscal year 2013. Next, let's look at the Japanese climate change policy in recent years. In 2015, prior to COP26, the Japanese government declared a target of 26% GHG reduction compared to 2013 level. And in 2019, the Cabinet approves the long-term strategies, which is a roadmap of development with low GHG emissions based on the Paris Agreement. In 2020, the Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga declared the aim of becoming carbon neutrality by 2050 at the US-sponsored climate summit held at the end of April 2021. He declared a 46 reduction compared to 2013 in 2030. Also, we picked up some notes from the former Prime Minister's speech with the aim of building a decarbonized society. First, he said that innovation is key, and they will accelerate our development by making the full use of next-generation solar cells and carbon recycling. Second, he emphasized contributing to the development of science and technology with the support of green investment. Third, he said that they will provide a type of forum for exchanging opinions on a variety of scales, including domestic and regional. And finally, it was mentioned that leading the global green industry, creating a virtuous cycle, will be a crucial goal. In order to achieve carbon neutrality, the government has mapped out several measures. The first one is Plan for Global Warming Countermeasures. This is the only comprehensive plan on global warming of Japan, closely related to NSDC. Currently, on 22nd October 2021, maximizing the usage of renewable energies towards carbon neutrality by 2050 has been decided by the Cabinet. The second is Basic Energy Plan. According to this, the Japanese government plans to disseminate renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power, while continuing to make some use of coal-fired power, which emits high levels of carbon dioxide. The third is Green Growth Strategies from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. In order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, it's necessary to drastically change the conventional industrial structure. By finding 14 fields and industries expected to grow, the government has formulated an action plan for virtuous circle between economy and environment. These fields include policies such as budget, tax, regulatory reform, standardization, and international cooperation. The fourth is Regional Decarbonization Roadmap from the Ministry of Environment. The Japanese government aims to create at least 100 leading decarbonized regions by 2030 through initiatives that take advantage of regional characteristics such as the promotion of renewable energy and the circular economy. Next, let's look at the 6th Basic Energy Plan, which is crucial to achieve carbon neutrality. The theme of this plan is to show the path of energy policy to achieve 46% reduction in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2050. It proposed the realization of low-cost energy supply through improved economic efficiency and realization of environmental compatibility with safety and stable energy supply as the first priority. If we are going to zoom in details of this energy plan, they are classified as 5 crucial elements. First, on the demand side of electricity. It's proposed to reform regulatory measures in order to promote energy conservation. The focus would be aggregation businesses that utilize distributed energy resources and local development through the use of new local electric power. Second, on renewable energy. It's proposed to expand the use of solar power and onshore wind power by securing suitable sites in a way that coexists with the local community. They also plan to realize the cost reduction and market integration through the use of bidding systems such as FIT and FIP systems. Third, on nuclear power. it's decided that we should place safety above all other considerations, and if the nuclear plants are found to be in compliance with the world's most strong regulatory standards by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they will respect its judgment and proceed with the restart of the nuclear power plant. First, on the thermal power. It's suggested to reduce the ratio of thermal power generation in the power source composition to the extent that it has the supply capacity to adapt to a temporary decline in the amount of electricity generated by renewable energy. Finally, on the natural resources as fuel. They will continue to develop comprehensive resource diplomacy and establish supply chains outside of Japan. Also, active involvement in realistic energy transition in Asia is expected. Of course, it takes account of positioning hydrogen as a new resource and accelerating social implementation. As you may know, restarting nuclear power plants is a controversial discussion in Japan. Even after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, all of the nuclear power plants were deactivated, but as of March 2021, 9 of them have been restarted these days. However, if we look at the public opinion and evaluation of energy measures, only about 10% of respondents are in favor of the continued use of nuclear power. Regarding renewable energy, a FIT system was introduced in 2012, whereby the government purchased electricity from renewable energy sources at a fixed price that is higher than the market price. The amount of electricity generated by solar power generation, including both residential and non-residential portions, has increased by about 50 million kilowatts since the start of the system until fiscal 2019, compared to about 560 kilowatts before the system was introduced in 2012. However, we should also be aware that the installation speed becomes a little slow down because the number of FIT authorized projects has been decreasing. So from now on, I will present how we, Japanese youth, perceive those attempts for 2050 carbon neutrality. In our view, the carbon neutral declaration is a significant step forward in a way that it has inspired all sectors, citizens, businesses, and local authorities to act together toward a clear goal. While we commend the long-term targets set for the period of up to 2050, we believe that there is a lack of interim concrete roadmap for 2030 and 2040 for achieving these targets. That is something that needs to be resolved. So, we analyze that those are challenges we are facing. First of all, we would mention that there is a lack of storytelling of when and how Japan will shift into new energy policy. Japan even hasn't shown that by when we are going to be decarbonized, and hasn't told us the stance on nuclear power generation, which leaves many problems such as the disposal of high-level radioactive waste. Since the Fukushima disaster, we haven't reached a conclusion on nuclear power generation for more than 10 years. The second challenge is the overemphasis on technological innovation, which risks delaying climate change action if we only hope for these innovations. The third challenge is the temperature gap with the public. There is a lack of awareness and behavioral change among the public, and we feel that few people are taking actions in their daily lives. The fourth issue is particularly structured administration. We believe that there is a need to change the system in which all fields and areas can cooperate in a cross-sectional manner. We therefore propose a policy from the youth perspective to deal with these issues. First, we believe that a roadmap should be drawn up for each energy source, not remain uncertainty of energy policy. For coal-fired power, how to reduce or eliminate our dependence on it would be clear with a certain timeline. And for nuclear power, Japan should determine whether to utilize or abandon them through public debate, including with young people who will have to pay the price. Second, we should not only promote Japan's valuable environmental technology to the world, but also accelerate the application of existing technologies so that they can be widely and commonly used in Japanese society. Third, through fact-based environment education and citizen discussion, they should aim to raise awareness of climate issues and change their daily choices. Fourth, they had better focus on joint policy making with a strategic collaboration. To achieve carbon neutral society, all of us, industry, business, academia, and citizen sectors, need to go hand in hand. Therefore, policymakers should establish a clear policy with various perspectives. From the next slide, we would like to explain our 4 points that GYK considers important in terms of climate change measures to be taken toward 2030. The first is to set an intermediate target consistent with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target based on backcasting. The current 2030 goal is not the mid-term goal consistent with the 2050 carbon neutrality goal and will leave future generations with a bill to pay. The second is the implementation of policies that promote sustainable lifestyles and economic activities. It is still unclear what kind of lifestyle each individual should choose in order to be a part of a way to be carbon neutral. We think it's important to quantify and visualize the environmental impact of lifestyles and clarify the behaviors we should take. For that, we would like to suggest the business sector to increase the number of options to realize carbonized lifestyle as investment. While it's important to bring in the carbon tax consistent with 2050 carbon neutrality, its introduction should be rapid but also on a phased basis. We also think that carbon pricing is an important policy because it can greatly contribute to the fade out of fossil fuels and the expansion of decarbonization technologies such as renewable energy. Besides that, we think inclusion of all sectors is necessary to accelerate green transformation, such as green education and discussion opportunities that the young generation can cultivate their ownership of, forming companies, corporations that everyone shouldn't leave behind. What's more, we also believe that it's important to support the fair transition of fossil resource-related industries and the iron and steel industry with a view to eliminating fossil fuels. In addition, the expansion of renewable energy is a very important factor but needs to be monitored to ensure that it does not cause environmental destruction. In particular, mega solar power plants pose the risk of landslide disasters, and a thorough assessment is required before introducing them. We call for a fair energy transition, including the understanding of residents too. Then lastly, what can we contribute to the ideal carbon neutrality society? Maybe I should have done it at the beginning, but first I would like to introduce us, the CYK community and activities a little. CYK was founded by youth who participated in COP26 in 2010. Our vision is to realize an equitable and sustainable society by committing as youth to solve climate change issues. Currently, with 60 members from all over Japan and some are from different countries, mainly engaged in policy advocacy to relevant ministries and agencies, have a discussion with companies, and hold events to raise awareness of climate change issues. We also consistently send our members to COP every single year. The overview of our activities as follows. For example, we hold regular study sessions every week, as well as internal study groups called environmental cafes, focusing on input, exchange of opinions with the aim of establishing accurate knowledge of climate change from a youth perspective. Other activities are field research, such as the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant tour with experts, or interviews at vegan restaurants, and so on. We actively seek ways to interact with other members and do what we can. Our focus is not only pointing out or claiming the problems, but also taking actions. I strongly hope beyond today's pavilion, we Asian youth go hand in hand to take actions to be able to achieve an ideal carbon neutrality. So, yeah, that's all of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Koano, for the wonderful speech. And I think that actually you pointing out that promoting policies to provide a sustainable lifestyle is very interesting, and it hasn't been actually touched upon as much despite its importance on it. So really also investing in the people for them to also adapt to the change is something that we really need to consider regarding these policies as we drive towards carbon neutrality. So that was wonderful, and thank you so much. And now I want to move to the panel discussion, where we can kind of talk more about our panelists' overview of their past experiences that they had, and relevant just kind of opinions on some questions that I would like to ask. And as Kuana actually mentioned in the last slide, that we're not only here to kind of criticize our governments and what the lack of action we're doing. I think we talked about that enough now. Now I really want to talk about the next stage on really kind of capacity building. How should we're all here from our different national governments, we have different experiences, and how can we synergize this now? How can we build on this momentum and kind of drive this together, especially with an Asia regional focus perspective? So first of all, I think that defining the concept is really, really important. And when we talk about carbon neutrality, it's not only about transitioning, but it's not only about moving to neutralize the carbon that we're emitting, but we're talking about transitioning our whole system, our lifestyle, everything that we were embedded into. And regarding that transition, what's so important is a just and inclusive approach to it. And I really want to talk more about how you guys define it with a more youth approach. What is just and a fair transition to you? So let me start with Sunyu first. I want to ask you, so we recognize that, as I mentioned before, we're heading into a just and inclusive transition. How would you define this? How do you portray this transition?
Okay, I'll talk about it. First of all, I think the just means the damage that occur during or before the conversion process is not started filled. In general, it is said that the climate crisis brings the same pain to everyone, but we have witnessed not in reality. The weak and the minority are the first to suffer the most. If the fair transition is not made, and the damage to be borne from the transition, it will only go to the weak. And I think it's very important to make an inclusive transition. The transition to the carbon neutrality does not the same with the break bad habit. We have to change the socio-economic structure itself, and which we have enjoyed ignoring its side effects so far. So, a change in which everything changes, not a change that progressive, little by little, and the change in which no one is alienated or more avoided in the process. I think this is just an inclusive transition. And mostly importantly, I think that the youth should clearly understand and actively participate in the series of the progress. Aren't we generation that is more sensitive to discrimination and want general transition than anyone else. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I also want to share this question with Hermia from Hong Kong. And can you share how you would define what a just and inclusive transition is?
I think, sorry, I forgot your name.
Sonyu.
Sunyu. I think Sunyu painted a very nice picture of how a just future should look like, a just inclusive future should look like. I just want to add on a little bit. I think it's very important to have dialogue with the local community to really build the resilience. Government might know a lot of stuff in terms of like intellectually, they don't know how exactly to live in a community, or each community depends on their geographical location could be different. So it's very important to really go to the community, ask for what they need, and set up solutions, set up adaptation plans with them together. I think a just inclusive transition should put people in front. We should emphasize that it is how the people is dealing with climate change. It's not just how we decarbonize. It's not just about the number. It's the people who is experiencing that. So, yeah. So really go into the community to talk to them, to set up strategic plan with them. Don't just organize consultation and we have no idea how the consultation or the opinions that set will be implemented. We need to have reports afterwards. How exactly are these suggestions to be implemented into government decisions or government plans or action plans? And also talking about youth, I think having youth on just advisory board or having youth to attend like public consultation to ask their opinion is not enough. We need to be at the table with them discussing, making these policies together. We need meaningful participation. It's not just being there. It's not ticking boxes. So this is what I want to say about how can it be just, making sure it's just and inclusive.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Actually, you mentioned we need more dialogue, we need more communication, talking to the local community as well, and therefore it builds on trust. And I think that also what you mentioned in your presentation is we're currently lacking trust with our government, and therefore it causes conflict. And then we're still in the moment of building on shared understanding of a common issue that everyone knows is a crisis. So I think dialogue is something that we really want to emphasize as a youth. Like it's dialogue everywhere. It's so important, building on that trust, and then on we can start to make actions that will benefit for everyone, are inclusive, and is fair and just. So thank you so much for that perspective. Thank you for that. And so I want to move more on to kind of the insight. So we talk about dialogue, we talk about communication, and then we need action. So I think that's the second step, as I have continuously mentioned. And I want to bring this to Koana from Climate Youth Japan. And how are you working to engage more youth into this dialogue, into the actions for carbon neutrality?
I think to involve more young people into action towards carbon neutrality, I would suggest arranging a youth assembly or conference, which is officially authorized by the cabinet. I think youth role could be two. Like first one is like delivering a future view towards like government or decision makers as a future generation, and second would be the how should I say, like encourage the decision makers to take a risk or like fear of change, regardless of fear of change, or how should I say, like important issues. So regarding that, I think not many Japanese people, young people, are now like actively involved in those like actions. So I think making those open opportunity for everybody would be a like best way to include more Japanese people, like make them more aware of the issues, and also like their voices would be implemented in the policy making decisions. I also want to note that like it's not a formality. I think it should be temporary, like discussion or feedbacks between the government or like decision makers and youth, I think.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. I also want to extend this question to Chao from TWYCC. Can you give some perspectives from your organization?
Yeah, and in terms of how to encouraging the youth to involve in the dialogue, I think it is also important to have a clear picture. What is the stakeholders? I mean, of course, like the youth, it is not a homogeneous group. They are a different type of youth, and they come from a different background, and they also care about different things. For instance, like for TWYCC, we have like kind of climate change. We went to school and we try to making sense of the impact related to the climate change. Because sometimes the children, they just live a very comfortable life and they didn't know what is happening outside the classroom. So this is one thing, and we try to making sense of the impact and try to have a more diverse picture, clear picture, what is involved in this scenario. And the last but not least, I would like to also mention, like, try to involve the children or the youth into the decision-making processes, because all of the time I have seen a lot of conference or even some informal, formal gathering, and we're just having some picture and having some talk, and they didn't change the policy. So what is the point? Yeah. Would you want to add on something?
So yeah, that's interesting. And you also mentioned stakeholders as well. And I think what you just meant is they provide the platform, but there is no really constructed discussion, not really like some kind of tangible actions that we need. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and therefore we have the words of youth washing, greenwashing, and so that's a really good point that you made. And I also actually want to ask you, what do you think are the key priorities our government or the stakeholder needs in order to achieve carbon neutrality?
I think for the priority, it is also the first try to, because in terms of to involve the youth in the decision-making process, I think it is also important to have more information, like to give a more, for instance, like a clear definition what is happening, and what is our goal, for instance. Like, because I think it would be better and also clear to understand if we have a clear structure and what is the goal. Are we sharing the same future? Something like that. I know it might sound quite abstract right now, because it would be really important, like, to have a clear scenario and a clear way to talk. Also, a bit like kind of a rule, in short. So, I mean, the priority should be clear and a structured framework to talk to each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I also want to direct this to Sunryu Kim from GEYK. I know that South Korea, as I mentioned, that they first made their first environmental forum to really talk with the future generations, and the Ministry of Environment, the minister herself, she actually attended that forum, and I think that was kind of the first ever platform that we had direct conversation with the minister. And I want to share your experience from that. What do you think what are the key priorities our stakeholders and our government decision makers need to ensure that carbon neutrality is achieved?
First of all, the Chao is talk about very good experience, and I think it is coordination of the related agencies. The carbon neutrality cannot be solved by the single policy or action. So there must be the simultaneous changes in numerous institutions or the policy. So, and the interest of many conflict in progress. So I think government should manage and coordinate it. And when I was meet the minister, already talk about this. So I think it's a very important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think this will be my second to last question, and I will also extend this to the floor. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask too. But so now I think it's about capacity building now. So we have the communication action, now capacity building. How do we strengthen this, synergize this? As I mentioned before, climate change is a transboundary issue. And so I actually want to ask Hermia, your experience from capacity building across regions, across national borders. Just, do you have any kind of experience you would like to share with us?
I think in terms of capacity building, first thing first, I think international conversation is already one of the ways to do capacity building. It's quite important for us to know how other places are doing things. So if we're doing like a regional talk, like what we're having here today, you're saying that you can learn from what TWYCC has done at the ceremony, as a graduation ceremony. I think after attending COP for a little bit more than a week, we are provided a lot of solutions from the more Europe-centric perspective on how to present, how to we involve with government. But usually in Asia, our government are not as responsive. They're usually seeing you from a more top-down perspective. You're a youth, you need to listen to people. How can we as Asian youth can come together and come up with our way to engage with our government, with our unique way to engage with government? I think this can only be done through a regional dialogue. But then it's also important for us to understand what is happening internationally. So we get to learn about loss and damage here at COP. We get to learn about let's say capacity building for carbon tax and carbon market. So all these internationally, what is happening? How can we localize it? Having that exposure is very important. That is kind of my opinion on capacity building, the exposure, and how can we eventually localize that to our particular regions and locally national level.
Absolutely, thank you. And Koana, can you kind of share your experience regarding capacity building in CYJ as well, and your learnings from it?
Well, I totally agree with Hamir said. I think a dialogue is very important for us. In Japan, there are not so many youth organizations. I would say 3 big organizations, but what I think is a problem is not so many interaction with us, even though we are in the same country. So I think small actions can be bigger if we cooperate together, because we are how should I say going to achieve the same goal. So I would say that, yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much. And actually, so Cheng Long, so he's actually from Macau as well. He's a part of TWYCC. He's studying in Taiwan, but he has background experience from Macau. And I want to it would be great to have some sharings on what Macau is doing on carbon neutrality. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, for the people who don't know where is Macau, Macau is just a city near Hong Kong, and to be honest, I would say our government don't really pay any attention to climate change. We don't have a law related to climate change, and we only have some fundings for the companies to upgrade their equipment to a more high efficient equipment, and also having some subsidies to the public transportation, which make our public transportation very affordable. But apart from that, we don't have some mitigation or adaptation measures. Although I would say Macau is a very vulnerable cities of climate change. Take the typhoon for example. In 4 years ago, we have a typhoon that have a great impact to Macau, and most of our places is flooding, and we also the electricity and the water supply is shut down because of the typhoon. Also, and we are a peninsula, and so we are very close to the sea. We will be affected by the sea level rise also, and also the heat waves. So it is very crucial for our government to really take actions and to build a law that is related to climate change.
Thank you. And actually, so I think carbon neutrality is also talking about mitigation, but at the same time, adaptation needs to be also talked about as well. And I think that regarding the frequent rainfalls or the natural disasters that we're having, adaptation is also key to the carbon neutrality as well. So thank you for sharing some background in Macau. And before I have my last question to all our panelists here today, I actually want to extend this floor to our audience. So I could do 1 or 2 questions. So if you guys have any relevant questions, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, awesome. I got a question from the YouTube live streaming. So this was the question. What do you think youth and other actors can do to counter carbon intensive activities that governments and other institutions do offshore? It could be such as building coal plants in other countries, etc. So, does anyone want to take the floor?
To counter government action.
Yeah.
I can give it a try, but this might not be the best suggestion. I think organizing climate strike or climate protest will be a way to voice out our opinions. Well, China Pavilion is next to me. It's a little bit sensitive.
It's a hard question.
There are some governments that do not listen to people anyways. To really counter their action, I would say either through strike to really show your discontent regarding the policy. Sometimes when it is not very sensitive, it works. And the other way I would say will be petition to really again show your discontent or your disagreement about their policy. But then well, from where I'm from, it's kind of like draw lots. You don't really know how they react to that. That they might agree with what you're saying and take down that, or they might not. So it's not the most effective way to do it. I'll stop there.
No, thank you so much for that. Actually, if I can answer this question too, sorry, can I just reread this question? So I think understanding, I'm not sure if I understand it 100%, but actually when our governments do some kind of activities off borders, somewhere we don't know, where the locals don't know, I think it's so important where capacity building comes in to connect with the people. For instance, I don't really want to criticize our national government, but the South Korean government have continuously been investing on the new coal power plant in Indonesia and Vietnam. So what we did is we contacted the locals over there, and we kind of talked about how we can make a campaign. How can we synergize this, even though it's across the next border, it's not happening right inside a neighborhood. But what we did is we contacted them, we campaigned for it, and now we also made a document on that. And then through that, it shows that we care about what our government does, not nationally, but internationally as well. We take accountability of that as well. And I really felt at heart that it's so important to be aware of what our government does in the international setting, because when we come to COY, the Conference of Youth, or COP, the Conference of Parties, we are here as a South Korean delegate, we are here as a Taiwanese delegate, a Hong Kong delegate, we have our countries back. And so it's so important to be aware and to really make sure that our government takes accountability of what they do outside of our country as well. And I think that's where capacity building really comes in, and it really shows that benefit of it. So that was a really great question. If we don't have any, awesome, yay! You can introduce yourself too, and that'll be great.
Thank you. Omar Ahmed from Climate Fresque organization. I'm from France personally. I was wondering what was your feeling about the climate awareness in your country, specifically regarding the awareness among young. Do you think that it's really rather about saving our planet is important, climate change is important, but well, the government are not doing this much, or is that rather a transformative awareness, meaning that young people are like taking actions in their lifestyle, like diminishing their consumption of meat, or taking less the car and trying to use bikes or public transportation? Do you see it this way, or do you think that there is still a lot to do to make people change in their just lifestyle? Thank you.
Great. I can take the question on behalf, not say on behalf, but just my observation in Hong Kong. I think, yes, we have the awareness. We're aware that climate change is happening and climate change is real. But then in terms of how to take action as youth, there is still a lack of it, lack of channel to really directly communicate with the government. And also, I think a lot of green groups in Hong Kong focus more on like biodiversity, on plastic waste. People would do these type of individual action, but they usually would not escalate it to a business level. So if you're talking about plastic waste, they would not really talk about like how to urge company to reduce or like to change it from the design perspective. They would just like minimize their consumption of it on their own. So this is some sort of like my observation. People care about it, but they're not very sure how to act on it. And to talk a little bit more, I think in the past few years, there's too much discontent or too much anger from the social political movement that a lot of youth people around me usually thinks that we should prioritize to solve the political situation, then we can talk about the environment. So environment is not up on their priorities, despite climate change is so urgent. But that's kind of the reality of this, what I see happening around like my peers.
I would say that not so many Japanese people are actually aware of, because like we are not like feeling the actual like urgency of the climate change. I would say it's that because when I was in Sweden, like as an exchange, I felt so much that European people in general like have a bit like higher awareness, or like have generally like options, for example like vegan options in like general. So like in terms of those like society like infrastructure based, we have not that so many opportunities to be aware of actually. But I also that's my like a personal opinion, but I also see this sign of hope that like taking the action for environmental like eco-friendly or like those social issues friendly can be like regarded a cool option for young people as well. So I hope that mind or like emotion like you can keep having, and then it becomes a bigger like action. I hope that.
Thank you. Can we also, I think there was one more person. Yeah, sure. Give the mic here. Oh, first we can do here and then.
So I have a question mainly to the representatives of Taiwan and Hong Kong, because as we all probably know, you have like issues. I mean, not to your issues, but like the other countries have issue. Like one country has issue with you. I just want to ask how conflict like that can be related to climate change. I mean, like how it impacts climate action mainly, and whether the youth is empowered by that, so they feel that it's all interconnected and the action is kind of empowered and is stronger, or whether youth feels that they should be quieter and shouldn't be speaking up.
I mean, in terms of political issue, I mean, maybe it has a different scale for in terms of the policy making, especially in the international film. It will have an influence because we are not recognized to a certain degree. But in terms of the domestic governance, there's nothing to do with the political issue, I would say, because in our national government, and the party is more like it is more for the transition, the sustainability transition. So they try hard to promote a lot of like a green energy policy, something like that. And we also try to make a transition and have a not just for the energy, but also for the industry. So I don't think it will be the problem. And for most of the young people, I found a quite interesting phenomenon. For instance, like I found a lot of commercial things, which is not bad, because they try to promote like a vegan movement or even some plastic-free thing, and in a very fancy way, but in a good way. Like try to be more interactive to the young people. Yeah, so I found it might be good to be louder and to be diverse. Yeah.
Well, in terms of climate action, I don't think it's very much influenced by the country, and But then, because, well, in Hong Kong, our emission is not counted in China's NDCs, and we don't have our own NDCs. We're kind of like a gray area that no one's really care about it. But then, yeah, so like in terms, let's say China has launched their national carbon pricing scheme, but Hong Kong is not involved. The Hong Kong government is trying to find ways to see how exactly would Hong Kong be included in that case. Everything is still under research and negotiation. But then when it comes to like youth participation, I think for myself, for example, after attending this COP, I understand how observers are not really allowed to the negotiation table, and I've been thinking of ways like how can for us obtain parties pass. Would that be from Hong Kong government? Would that be from China government? We're not very sure yet. Everything is quite unclear and undefined, especially on the climate and environmental field. Environmental field is definitely a lot less sensitive as compared to a lot of other issues, and there are still quite a number of like voices on how to make more ambitious plans, and they also allow these voices to be there right now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, one last question.
I'm a climate activist from Mexico, and I really liked how it was mentioned that especially COP and COI is usually centered around European solutions, and that is true. Mostly our voices in Latin America, and I also feel a lot in East Asia and Central Asia, also happen to be underneath the European solutions. So my question is for all of you, and it's mostly talking about what do you think is the most effective way for us, like the global south and the underrepresented countries, to really talk and get to our governments?
Oh, great question. Okay, no one.
Give me a little bit of time.
Yeah. Some time to digest.
Sorry, that was a very hard question. But
Well, I don't know. Well, yet again, I'm not sure if I understood your question completely right, but actually, like I was in a lot of like going to these pavilion settings and also like just like the conferences as well, and I also saw that the representation is mostly European and mostly to the global north. And well, nothing, I can't accuse any of that, but I think it's also really important for us Asians to actually be a part of that conversation as well, try to be in that dialogue. I think that this is kind of like a two-way kind of approach. I think this has to also be ensured on our side, that we make that effort to be part of that conversation, to have a word in it. But then on the other side, all seats need to be secured. So we need that invitation to go there, to give a voice out, to be heard. So I think it just really works on both ways, and to ensure that the communication is there. So not sure if this answered your thing right, but yeah, so I also try to make an effort, try to raise my hand to whatever sessions I went to, try to make sure that the Asian voice was heard, but it's just an effort that we need to make on both sides. But yeah, thank you for the great question.
And as a little argument, I think it's really important to see the climate crisis problem, not country by country, just international problem. So we should focus on the international matter, not the country by country, global north or global south. This is not important. I think only the focus on the international problem, and we should finish this climate crisis. Thank you.
This is not speaking from any experience, it's just some thoughts that I have in my head. I think especially for Asians or like some other, I think I talked to some people from Africa, I think a lot of time in a social structure, we're taught that we need to listen to our elderlies. They're more wise, they know the things. I think seeing how some of the European folks here interact with their negotiators, they see themselves as an equal. They don't look down on themselves. And I think this is something that we might be able to adapt. To go there to see ourselves as an equal, to think that as long as we believe that we belong to the negotiation table, I think there will be ways that we can make it there. But first we need to believe we are an equal participants here, that our voice deserves to be listened. It's not waiting to be listened, but deserve to be listened. Not sure how exactly that will change my behaviors or how my actions with my government will be, but I think the mentality change is also important. That will eventually affect how your behavior with the government to be.
Awesome.
I don't know if that will link to like a good or bad outcome though. Like that's uncertain.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And also, I actually want to give the last question to all our panelists here today. Because of COVID, this setting here is so special to actually be here on site to really engage with us. So I think that I want to use this opportunity for you to give just like a key takeaway from our audience here, our audience virtually who's with us today, and especially our youth. What do you want to say from your experience in COP26 as well? So just a key takeaway message, but it's best to make it short.
Alright. So I take it first. So I would say like we are here like we as a youth. I think we should all demand for our better future, and we all prove that we can do like to drive for a better future. So I think we all have faith. So that's why we are here and we are speaking how can we have the room for improvement. And also the second is that like I think we should all like be proud of ourselves, because I once doubt for the reasons that I come to COP26, because I have like all the efforts, all the time, and all the money that I've spent here. I'm not sure that is our voices will be heard by the COP26 and all the delegates, all the parties from all across the world. So I would say that we should all be proud of ourselves, because we are doing the things that are important, and we all prove that we can drive for a change. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think for me, the most important thing I learned during this day is reminding. Like, I really enjoying visiting a lot of pavilion or side event, because the people, not just the panelists, also the participants, they're raising questions. For instance, like I really like your question, and your question sort of to remind me like why I'm here and why we try to do more, even think more clearly. So it is not a new thing, but I think because sustainability transition is a long process, and we really need a lot of cheerful atmosphere, and also a lot of reminding, like to remind it why you are here, even though you will encounter a lot of difficulty. For instance, like in Taiwan, the domestic thing, and also the international position, something like that. So I really like reminding is important.
Thank you.
First of all, I really want to thank Korea Pavilion for organizing these activities, and everyone who is interested in what is happening in Asia to participate in this event. My message to, I think, if you're leaders, if you're business leaders, I will say that really understand climate emergency. It is not coming, it is there right now, and we need change right now. We can't we can't no longer phrase the question on like, oh, how are we, like, when are we going to achieve carbon neutrality? It should be how exactly we are going to achieve carbon neutrality. The question mark should not be the years, the question mark is how. The deadline is set there, and we need to follow the deadline. We need to listen to what IPCC is saying. For all the youth here, believe in yourself. We should be listened. We belongs to the negotiation table, and we need to make our way there. It is very, very important, because we are the future generation, and how we foresee the future, how we picture our future to be like, need to be listened by the people, not just from the street, but also here in those closed rooms. For some reason, we need to make our way inside. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this precious time again. I would like to send two sentences towards to youth, especially. The first is like cherish your concerns or like worries or emotions towards climate issues whenever you realize or like you come up with, and then like try to take a small action. I would say that I was not so much involved in climate change issues before, I don't know, like the beginning of a university, and then I think not so many Japanese people are actually taking actions as well. So I want tell them to like cherish your emotions and then try it. And then second, I would want to say also that don't forget the learning mind or like cooperating mind. How should I say? Of course, like youth perspective is really necessary to be like say decision or making, like also. But I also think experts or like business sectors or like those adults' views are really like important as well, because they are like have experience or like they have specific knowledge. So we use like, of course, like try to take an action, but also like absorb from them, like knowledge wise. Then we can change we can make a change in the future as a future generation. So like don't forget the cooperating mind. That's what I want to say.
Thank you so much.
I asked everyone to speak the end because I'm going to talk about something warm. There are still many climate problems in here that look like can't be solved, and I sometimes think we are like the David fighting Goliath. But unlike the mystical fight, our fight is to be alone and to be really tired and sometimes to feel lonely. But I want to tell you that we are fight together about the carbon neutrality and the transition and the end of the climate crisis that we believe is right. Let's end the climate crisis with our hand so that our next generation can imagine the tomorrow of the earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you once again, everyone, our panelists, especially a wonderful audience here. And I just want to end today's speech session with saying that we are the generation to demand for climate justice to ensure to safeguard our future. And so I feel that the speeches that you gave, the message that you sent out was really well heard to virtually and our on-site audience here today. So thank you. And I want to finish this session with former President Barack Obama's speech that he made yesterday, saying that young people in particular have an opportunity to make real difference. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I'll end it now.